Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
There's a moment, and you've had it, I know you have, where you're standing in a room full of people who love you, people who do anything for you, and you still feel invisible. Not lonely in the way that word gets thrown around. Something quieter than that. Something older. Like you're watching your own life through glass, pressing your palm to it, and no matter how close you get, you can't quite feel the warmth on the other side. That feeling has a name. Most of us just never got permission to say it out loud. Belonging, or rather, the ache of its absence. I want to sit with you here for a moment, because I think you've been carrying something for a very long time. Something that doesn't have a tidy label. It's not depression, though some days it wears that coat. It's not loneliness, though it sleeps in the same bed. It's this quiet, persistent whisper that says, I am here, but I don't quite fit here. And the cruelest part, the whisper gets louder in the rooms where you're supposed to feel most at home. Maybe it's the Thanksgiving table where your opinion still gets talked over. Maybe it's the friendship group where the conversation moved on to grandchildren, and you're still trying to figure out who you are now that your children don't need you the same way. Maybe it's your own marriage. This person you've built a life with, and some Tuesday afternoon you look across the kitchen and think, does he really see me? Not the me I perform, the me underneath. That's the weight we carry. And most of us, we've been carrying it so long, we've stopped noticing it's there. We just call it being tired. We call it getting older. We call it just the way things are. But I want to tell you something that no one may have ever said to you directly. The hunger for belonging is not a weakness. It is the most human thing about you. Here's what the research actually says. And I'm not talking about cold, clinical studies you'd skim in a waiting room. I'm talking about decades of work by psychologists like Roy Baumeister and Mark Leary, who found that the need to belong isn't a want. It's a need as fundamental to our survival as food and shelter. Our brains are literally wired to treat social rejection the way they treat physical pain. The same neural pathways, the same distress signals. Which means every time you've felt on the outside, every time you've smiled through a conversation that made you feel erased, every time you've gone home and wondered if you matter to anyone the way they matter to you, your nervous system was sending up flares. You weren't being dramatic, you were being human. And yet, for women of our generation, women who were raised to be the glue, the nurturers, the ones who make sure everyone else feels included, admitting that we feel left out feels almost shameful. Like we should have figured this out by now. Like needing connection is something we outgrow, or something we earn, or something we should have secured decades ago, like a retirement account. We weren't taught to say, I feel like I don't belong here. We were taught to say, can I get anyone anything? And so the unspoken truth sits there, heavy as stones in our chest. We host the dinners. We make the calls. We show up. And we smile. And we wonder, in the soft, unguarded hours before sleep, do I matter here? Would they notice if I quietly disappeared? I need you to hear this next part carefully, because this is where most conversations about belonging go wrong. They tell you the problem is out there, that you need to find your tribe, join a club, put yourself out there, as if belonging is a destination you simply haven't booked the flight to yet. But belonging isn't a place you arrive at. It's not a group you gain access to with the right password. Belonging, real belonging, begins inside. It starts with a quiet, revolutionary act. The decision to believe that you are someone worth belonging to. Not after you lose the weight. Not once your house is in order, or your family is settled, or your past is resolved. Now, as you are, with the laugh lines and the regrets and the parts of yourself you've kept carefully folded away in the back of your heart. That's not wishful thinking. That's not self-help language I'm borrowing from a weekend retreat. That is the psychological truth at the foundation of every meaningful connection. We cannot fully receive love from others if we have not created a sanctuary inside ourselves where we feel we deserve it. And most of us who grew up being praised for how well we served others, were never taught to build that sanctuary. So that's what we're going to do together. But first, I need you to understand where this hunger for belonging actually comes from. Because until you understand its roots, you'll keep reaching for it in the wrong places, wondering why you always come away still empty. There's a particular kind of woman I've met in therapy rooms, in church basements, in quiet conversations that happen after the book club wine has been poured and the masks have softened just a little. She's capable. She's generous. She remembers everyone's birthday and notices when someone's been quiet too long. She would drive 2 hours in the rain for a friend without being asked. And she has absolutely no idea why she still feels like she doesn't belong anywhere. If that woman sounds familiar, if you recognized yourself in that description, the way you recognize your own handwriting, then I want you to stay very close to what I'm about to say. Because the hunger you feel, it didn't start in your 50s or your 60s. It didn't begin when the kids left, or when the career ended, or when the friendship quietly unraveled without anyone officially saying goodbye. It started much, much earlier, in a room that was much smaller, with people who were doing the very best they could and still, somehow, left something unfinished in you. Developmental psychologists have a term, secure attachment. It's the invisible architecture built in our earliest years, between a child and her caregivers, that tells her, at a cellular level, you are safe here, you are seen here, you belong here. When that architecture is solid, a child grows up with an internal compass that points toward connection. She can tolerate conflict without believing it means abandonment. She can be imperfect without believing it means rejection. She can walk into a room of strangers and feel not comfortable necessarily, but worthy, like she has a right to take up space. But so many of us, especially women of our generation, raised in homes where emotions were managed, not explored, where being too sensitive was a criticism, not a kindness. We didn't get that solid foundation. We got something more conditional. We got love that felt like it had to be earned. Behave well, and you belong. Be quiet when the adults are talking, and you belong. Don't make a fuss, don't need too much. Don't want too loudly, and you can stay in the warmth. And so we learned. God, did we learn? We became expert readers of rooms. We became fluent in what other people needed before they knew they needed it. We became the women who hold it all together, who smooth every edge, who make sure no one else feels as unmoored as we secretly do. And we called that love. We called it strength. We called it just who I am. But what it really was, underneath all that beautiful, exhausting competence, was a child's strategy for survival. If I am useful enough, maybe I won't be left. If I am good enough, maybe I'll finally belong. Here's the quiet heartbreak of that strategy: it works, until it doesn't. For decades, it works. The family holds together. The friendships stay intact. The marriage finds its rhythm. The career rewards your reliability. You are needed, and being needed feels close enough to belonging that most days, you don't notice the difference. But then something shifts. The children leave. The career ends or changes shape. The body starts asking for rest in ways you can't ignore. The friendships thin out, not dramatically, just slowly, the way water recedes from a shoreline. And the business that once kept everything humming starts to go quiet. And in that quiet, that particular stillness that your mid-50s or 60s can bring, the old strategy stops working. Because you can't earn belonging from a house that doesn't need tending the way it used to. You can't perform your way into feeling seen by people who've grown accustomed to your competence and forgotten to look at your face. And so the hunger returns. Older now, more tired. carrying with it a resignation that is somehow worse than the original wound. Maybe I just missed my window. Maybe belonging was something for younger women. Maybe this is just what the rest of life feels like. I want to sit with that feeling for just a moment, not to fix it immediately, not to rush past it, because this is where most women make a critical mistake. They assume the emptiness is evidence. Evidence that they're too difficult, too much, too late. Evidence that the people in their life don't love them enough, or that they themselves never learned how to love right. They take the quiet whispers of the wound and turn them into verdicts. And they stop reaching. But here's what I know. What 40 years of human psychology teaches us over and over, in study after study, in story after story, emptiness is not evidence of your unworthiness. Emptiness is evidence of unmet hunger. That's all. A woman who is hungry isn't broken. She simply hasn't been fed. And the specific hunger for belonging, for being truly known, not just needed, not just tolerated, not just included in the group chat. That hunger doesn't diminish with age. In fact, research from the Harvard Study of Adult Development, one of the longest running studies of human life ever conducted, found that the quality of our relationships in our later decades is the single greatest predictor of not just happiness but health, physical health, longevity, cognitive vitality. Belonging isn't soft. It isn't sentimental. It is as biological as breathing. Which means your hunger isn't a character flaw. It's your body, your heart, your nervous system saying this is essential. Don't give up on this. And this is the part I need you to sit with. The belonging we're hungry for in this season of life cannot be built the old way. The strategy of earning, performing, smoothing, serving, it will not get us there. Not because we weren't good enough at it, but because it was never designed to create what we actually need. What we actually need is something far more vulnerable and far more powerful. We need to be known without performing, chosen without earning, seen in the moments when we are not useful, not capable, not holding anything together, and loved there anyway. That kind of belonging, it doesn't come from doing more. It comes from a willingness to do something most of us were never taught, to let ourselves be seen, really seen. The parts we're proud of and the parts that make us wince. The competent woman and the frightened girl who still lives inside her. The love we've given so freely and the love we've been quietly starving for. There's a word that gets misused so often it's nearly lost its meaning. Vulnerable. We hear it and we picture someone weeping openly, or sharing their deepest secrets with a stranger, or posting something painfully honest on social media with shaking hands. That's not what I mean. What I mean is something quieter. Something that happens in ordinary moments, in ordinary kitchens, in ordinary conversations. When you have the choice to say the rehearsed, safe, acceptable thing, and instead you say the true thing. When your friend asks how you're doing and instead of awe, busy, you know how it is, you pause, just half a second longer than usual, and say, honestly, I've been feeling a little lost lately. That half second. That tiny departure from the script, that is vulnerability, and that is where belonging is born. I want to talk about something that most women in this season of life have never been directly offered permission to unlearn. Because here's what I've come to understand, sitting with women across decades of work. The things that are keeping us from belonging aren't the big dramatic wounds. They're not the obvious traumas or the glaring relationship failures. They're the small, quiet rules we absorbed so early we forgot they were rules at all. Rules like don't need too much. Rules like keep the peace. Rules like your feelings are fine, just don't let them inconvenience anyone. Rules like, if you haven't figured yourself out by now, there's something wrong with you. We didn't choose these rules. They were handed to us by mothers who were handed them by their mothers, by a culture that rewarded women's selflessness and pathologized their needs, by decades of being the ones who held space for everyone else while quietly learning not to need any space held for ourselves. and they served us. I want to honor that. Those rules kept us safe in environments where need was punished, where emotion was inconvenient, where our job was to be the steady one. They were survival strategies, and they were smart ones. But we are not in those environments anymore. And a survival strategy carried into safety becomes a prison. The first thing we have to unlearn, and I say unlearn deliberately, because this is not about adding something new to your already full life, is the belief that being known is dangerous. Somewhere along the way, most of us learned that being truly seen was a risk not worth taking. Because we had been truly seen in our neediness, in our fear, in our imperfection, and it hadn't gone well. Maybe we were dismissed. Maybe we were mocked. Maybe the person we reached toward simply didn't have the capacity to hold what we offered, and we absorbed that as evidence that we were too much. So we became strategic about what we revealed. We showed the capable version, the gracious version, the version that had it together, mostly. We let people love the performance because loving the performance felt safer than letting them near the person underneath and finding out she wasn't enough. But here's the devastating arithmetic of that protection. When we hide the real self to avoid rejection, we also make genuine acceptance impossible. Because if someone chooses you, the careful, curated, always composed version of you, their love lands on a costume. And some part of you always knows it. That's why you can be surrounded by people who love you and still feel profoundly alone. The love is real. But it isn't reaching you. It's reaching the version you decided was safe to show. And you are so much more than that version. So how do we begin? How do we actually start to unlearn decades of self-protection without blowing up our lives or having some dramatic breakdown in the produce aisle? Slowly. Gently, in small, deliberate acts of realness that build on each other like stones across a stream. I want to give you something concrete here, because I know that for women of our generation, insight without application feels like being handed a beautiful map with no roads marked on it. The first practice is what I call one true thing. Once a day, in one conversation with one person, you say one true thing that you would normally edit out. Not a confession, not a trauma dump, just one small, honest departure from the performed version of yourself. It might sound like, I actually don't know how I feel about that yet. Or, I've been lonelier than I let on. Or even just, that hurt my feelings a little and I didn't say so at the time. One true thing. That's all. What you'll discover, and I promise you this, because I've watched it happen more times than I can count, is that the true thing doesn't push people away the way you feared. More often than not, it does something miraculous. It invites them. It gives them permission to be real too. It creates a tiny opening where, before, there was only the smooth, polished surface of two people performing okayness at each other. Belonging doesn't happen in the highlight reel conversations. It happens in the cracks. In the moments of admitted confusion, or shared exhaustion, or laughter about something that was actually kind of terrible. It happens when two people look at each other and wordlessly agree, we don't have to pretend here. The second thing we have to unlearn is the belief that belonging requires sameness. So many of us, especially as we've aged out of the communities that used to define us, the school gate, the workplace, the neighborhood, have been unconsciously searching for a group where we fit perfectly. Where everyone thinks like us, grieves like us, finds joy in the same places we do. A sanctuary that requires no translation of ourselves. And that search, as beautiful as the impulse behind it is, keeps coming up empty. Because that group doesn't exist, not because you're too different, but because everyone is too different once you get past the surface. Real belonging, the kind that holds you through difficulty, that doesn't evaporate when you change your mind or change your life, is built not on sameness, but on mutual willingness to stay curious about each other. It's built between people who may have almost nothing in common on paper, but who share one essential quality: they are interested in the truth of each other's experience. They ask real questions. They tolerate the discomfort of not understanding. They don't need you to be easy to love. They're willing to do the work of learning how. That kind of person, and they are out there, I assure you, doesn't require you to perform. They require you to show up, which is both simpler and more terrifying. And then there is the third unlearning, the deepest one. The one that most of us circle for years before we're ready to land on it. We have to unlearn the belief that we are too late. I hear this so often it breaks my heart a little each time. I'm too old to make real friends now. It's different when you're young. Connections just happen. Nobody wants to do the work of new friendship at this stage. Or the quieter, more internal version: I've already become who I am. There's no room left for me to be someone who truly belongs somewhere. That belief is not wisdom. It is exhaustion dressed up as wisdom. The research on adult friendship and late in life connection is genuinely startling in its optimism. Studies consistently show that some of the deepest, most sustaining relationships of people's lives are formed after 50. Because by then, we've survived enough to have shed a great deal of the performance. We know in our bones what matters. We have less patience for the shallow and more capacity for the real. We've been through enough that we recognize a kindred spirit not by their resume, but by the particular quality of how they listen. You are not too late. You are, if anything, exactly at the right moment. Tired enough of performing to finally stop. Old enough to know that time is not infinite, and therefore too precious to spend it in rooms where you feel invisible. Wise enough to know the difference between a connection that feeds you and one that simply keeps you company. The belonging you've been hungry for your whole life. It is still available to you, fully, without asterisks. Without conditions about your age or your history, or how many years you've spent looking in the wrong direction. And here is where I need you to lean in one final time before we reach the place where all of this lands. It will require one more act of courage, one more unlearning that is less about what you do in the world and more about what you do inside yourself. And that is where we're going next. There is a particular kind of afternoon that I think you might know. The house is quiet. The obligations of the day have settled. There's tea, maybe, or the last of the light coming through a window at that particular angle that makes everything look briefly, unbearably beautiful. And in that stillness, before you reach for the phone or the television or the next thing on the list, there is a moment, just a brief, long moment, where it is just you and you. And I want to ask you something I mean with absolute sincerity. How do you feel about that person? Not your accomplishments. Not your roles. Not the mother, the wife, the friend, the colleague, the woman who shows up and holds it together. Just the one who lives behind all of that. The one who wakes at 3 in the morning with thoughts she hasn't shared with anyone. The one who still has dreams she hasn't spoken aloud, because speaking them might make their absence more painful. The one who has loved so much and so long and wonders, in the quiet whispers of an unguarded moment, whether she has ever been truly, completely, unconditionally loved in return. How do you feel about her? Because here is the truth that every thread of this conversation has been leading toward. The one that took me years to understand, and that I now believe is the foundation beneath all foundations. You cannot find lasting belonging in the world until you have stopped being a stranger to yourself. This is not a platitude. I want you to feel the weight of it. The way you'd feel the weight of something solid and real placed in your hands. Think about it this way. When we talk about belonging, about feeling truly seen, truly chosen, truly at home in a relationship or a community, what we're really describing is the experience of being known and accepted simultaneously. Known fully. Accepted anyway. That's the miracle of it. That's what makes it feel like oxygen when you finally find it. But there is a precondition that we almost never talk about. Before someone else can know and accept you simultaneously, you have to be willing to know yourself and accept what you find there simultaneously. Because if you haven't done that inner work, you will do one of two things in every relationship that tries to get close. You will either hide, offering only the acceptable pieces and keeping the rest behind glass, or you will outsource. You will hand another person the enormous, unfair, impossible task of making you feel whole from the outside in. And neither of those paths leads to belonging. One leads to loneliness inside connection. The other leads to dependency that eventually collapses under its own weight. The only path through, the only one that actually works, that holds, that deepens over time, runs straight through the interior. Through the quiet, often uncomfortable practice of becoming someone who knows herself. Who has made peace not with being perfect, but with being real. Now, I know what some part of you is doing right now. That practical, slightly skeptical voice that has kept you sensible for decades. It's saying, "This sounds lovely, but what does it actually mean? Become friends with myself. I've been myself for 60-some years. I think I know her." And I say this with genuine tenderness. Most of us know our history. We know our habits and our preferences and our fears. We know what we're good at and what we avoid. We know the stories we tell about who we are. But knowing your stories is not the same as knowing yourself. Knowing yourself, really knowing, the way you know a dear friend, means being curious about your own interior life without immediately judging what you find there. It means noticing when you feel hurt and asking why with genuine interest instead of dismissing it. It means sitting with the parts of yourself you consider failures or embarrassments and asking them, with the same compassion you'd offer a beloved sister, "What happened to you? What do you need?" It means building, slowly and deliberately, what I described in the beginning of our time together, a sanctuary. Not a perfect life, not a resolved past. A sanctuary, an interior space where you are allowed to exist without having to earn it. Where the quiet whispers of your own truth are welcomed rather than shushed. Where you are finally and completely at home. And here is the extraordinary thing that happens when you begin to build that sanctuary. The world outside changes. Not because the world actually changes. The people in your life are still who they are. The circumstances are still what they are. But your relationship to the world changes in ways that are almost difficult to describe without sounding like you've joined a cult. You stop needing every conversation to confirm your worth, which means you can actually be present in conversations rather than scanning them for evidence of whether you matter. You stop performing belonging, desperately engineering situations where you feel included, and start recognizing it when it's genuinely offered, which means you stop missing the real thing while chasing the imitation. You start attracting different kinds of connection. This is the part people find hardest to believe, but it is so consistently true that I stake a great deal on it. When you carry yourself as someone who belongs, not arrogantly, not loudly, just with that quiet, settled quality of a person who is at home in her own skin, other people feel it. The ones who are also hungry for real connection are drawn toward it like warmth. You become, without trying, a sanctuary for others, because you have become one for yourself. I want to tell you about a woman. I'll call her Margaret, though that isn't her name. Margaret came to me at 63, recently retired, her youngest child newly independent, her marriage comfortable but distant in the way that long marriages sometimes become, like two rivers that have been running parallel, so long they've forgotten how to merge. She said she had everything she was supposed to want and felt, as she put it, like a guest in my own life. She didn't need more activities. She didn't need a new friend group or a hobby or a women's retreat, though those things came later and brought their own gifts. What she needed, and this took us months to reach together, was to grieve. to grieve the version of herself she had set aside so gradually, so responsibly, so lovingly that she hadn't noticed the leaving. The girl who wanted to paint. The young woman who had opinions she'd learned to soften. The person who found certain things genuinely funny in a loud, unladylike way she'd trained herself out of. The dreamer, the seeker, the one with edges. She'd sanded herself so smooth in service of everyone else's comfort that she'd lost the texture of herself. And in grieving that, something unexpected happened. She got angry. Briefly, cleanly, not destructively, but honestly. And then, on the other side of the anger, she got curious. About who she still was. About who she might still become. About what she actually thought, felt, wanted, not as a mother or a wife or a retiree, but as Margaret, as herself. She started painting again. Terribly at first, and she didn't care. She started saying the funny thing instead of the appropriate thing, and discovered her husband laughed in a way she hadn't heard in 20 years. She told a friend the truth about something she'd been pretending about for a decade, and that friend, instead of pulling away, said, "Oh, thank God. Me too." Belonging didn't find Margaret when she went looking for it. It found her when she stopped hiding from herself. So here's what I want to leave with you. Not as homework, not as a program, just as a quiet offering from one woman who has wrestled with these same questions to another. Start there. In the afternoon quiet. In the space before you reach for the distraction. Sit with yourself just for a few minutes. Not to fix anything or figure anything out. Just to be present to your own company. To notice what arises without immediately managing it. To ask with real curiosity, what do I actually feel right now? What do I actually need? And when the answers come, and they will in their own time, in their own language, receive them the way you would receive a confidence from someone you love. With care, with interest, without judgment. Build the sanctuary one quiet moment at a time. Say one true thing a day. Let one person a little closer than feels comfortable. Grieve what was set aside and get curious about what remains. And know, please, carry this with you. That the hunger you have felt your entire life for a place where you truly belong, for a love that sees all of you and chooses you anyway, for a home that isn't a building but a feeling, that hunger was never a sign that something was wrong with you. It was always a sign that you knew, somewhere in the deepest part of yourself, that you deserved something real. You still do. You always have. And it is not too late to come home.